So I'm going to show you how to put the blocks together. So we looked at how we were making our blocks, which are basically half square triangles, but using 5 strips of a jelly roll. And we've cut them in half as we would with a half square triangle and sewn 1/4 inch away from the absolute diagonal and open them out, and now we probably start with 14, but we only need 13 for blocks to make this size quilt, which is square. So I want you to have a look. We've got the diagonals all running in the same direction. So the blocks are all sitting, if I hold this one up like that, then all the blocks are running that way. Okay, now the top section, which we're going to look at first, and the bottom section are constructed in the same way, but you remember to keep the diagonal running the same way. So if you look, we've got a corner triangle at the top and we've got 2 side pieces. Then we've got a row of 3 with 2 side triangles. The row of 5, you might not be able to see, but I'll show you that a bit later. Then a row of 3, but again, keeping the diagonal the same way, the triangles run the opposite way, and the bottom section. So I'm going to show you how to construct the top section and the bottom section. They're both exactly the same, but we need to keep the angle of the square running in the same way. So what I've done first of all is, this is going to act as my background fabric, just because it's what I had, and I've cut a 10-inch square, and then I've cut across the diagonal. So I've got 2 right-hand triangles. Now, if the fabric that you're going to use for your backing is slightly open weave and you're a bit anxious because that's obviously a bias edge, then use some starch before you cut it. So iron the starch on and then make that nice and firm. And just be careful, respect that edge because it is a bias edge, and the last thing we want to do is to be stretching it out. So if we take then our first block, now I've trimmed the 2 blocks down so that they're absolutely square, just because they've been through the machine again, so even though we cut them. So what I'm using is a squared ruler which has a diagonal line. Now if you match, when you put your block underneath, if you put our stitch line and run it along the diagonal line on the ruler, and then trim beyond and make that square, and then move the ruler along the diagonal line and make the square as big as it can be. Now it could be, depending on your seam allowance, you might get a square that's 9 3/4, you might get a square that's 9 1/2, you might get a square that's 9 1/4. It doesn't matter, as long as all the squares are the same size. So I've trimmed these to 9 1/4, so that is the size I want. So I've got my 10-inch square, I've cut it across the diagonal, and so I've now got 2 right angle triangles. So I'm going to make the top section. So if we look at the angle of where the triangles are, here's my block. So I've got to put 1 triangle on this side, and I'm going to match the edges along the 2 right angle sides that I've got. So don't worry if the top piece is standing up a little bit, because that will just account for the variations in the size of your trimmings, but we can trim that off. So I've put 1 piece here, and it's matching along that bottom edge. So when I put it on, obviously I'm matching down here, but I'm also matching down here, and if I turn it over, you can see I've got a little bit popping up there, but when I've sewn that on, I'll lose some of that. So that's going on one side, and the same angle on the opposite side. These are the top and the bottom one are the only tricky, not tricky, but just need a little bit more thought. So you will then have a block that looks like that. So you can see where our block is in the centre and these two are sitting either side. Now, the other cut you need to make is a square, and I've cut mine 7 3/8, but you know, why would I do that? So cut a square 7.5 inches. Again, cut it in half. Use the starch if you feel it's not going to hold its shape properly, and use the long edge of the triangle this time, and that's going to run across the top. Now, if you want to be absolutely sure you're in the centre, just very gently pinch where the halfway is. Remember, that's your bias edge, so no stretching it. So just pinch where the edge is, fold your block in half, pinch there, and match those two together. So I'm going to put a pin sideways. I know I don't normally do that, just so you can see where it goes. And the edges will extend beyond where we need it to be, but that's our seam allowance, so that's fine. So I'd sew the two side pieces first, then the top piece, and that's what we've made our first block. It's hard to do it just with pins. So this is one corner when it's turned on point, and there's the two sides. Now repeat with the bottom square, but remember, this is the top, and this block has to stay the same way up. So if I was doing this in class, I would suggest you do these two pieces straight away. So work across these, because you'll be able to see which is the top. So in the first one, we had our long edges at the top. In our second one, so this is the bottom, we've got to add our corner triangle and our triangles on these sides facing away, so that the pattern stays the same. So that's why I say do them together, but they are opposite ends. So if I try to hold this one up, you can see this time we're adding the triangle. The small triangle is going where our stripes are all coming down, and this time the side triangles are going the opposite sides. So it makes sense once you start putting it together. So this time we're going to put our triangles facing an extension of here. Let's make sure I'm doing it on the right side. So that one will go on there, and this one will go on there. Again, make sure where you've got the right angle that you're matching those edges. Open those out and put the small triangle along this bottom edge. So the two pieces are the opposite to each other. So I hope that makes sense. Now, the next row is much easier. So we've now got our top row 3. So you've seamed those 3 together. Use the same size square as you did for the sides there. So 10.5 or no, 10-inch squares. I trim them to 10, and cut those in half and add them facing that way on the top row 3, upside down on the bottom row 3, and row 5, where you've got your 5 blocks together, has the smaller triangle facing out, and that makes the square. So it's probably as clear as mud, that. Have a go, see how you get on. It's a really interesting little quilt to make. It is quite simple. It's just those top ones is just the other thing is to remember the direction of the diagonal, and then when it's all pieced together, layer it up. I like to put my pieced work on a piece of wadding and backing that is the finished size, and I like to quilt at that stage, and then I will add some frames. So on this one I added a 2.5 inch strip in dark blue, and then I added a 3.5 inch strip in this fabric. So they are quilt as you go, they're added afterwards, and then the binding. So I did a little bit of hand quilting as well in these areas, just to finish it off there, because it's got a bit of wintry theme, it's sort of Christmas trees, but you can do whatever you want on there. Okay, hope that works.